So you're looking at buying a rack. Well, what I want to do today is I'm going to review the bridge built Phoenix rack, the folding version of their rack system, their BFJ's extra heavy duty J cups, the pull up bar, and the possible dip attachment. Hey crew, Coach Josh here with GarageGangGyms.com, coming to you with another review of some of the equipment I have around the gym. And today it's all about the rack behind me. So this rack, the Bridge Built Phoenix rack, is a rack that you guys can fold up and actually move out of the way, which for some of you might sound really good. And I'm gonna talk to you about all the pluses and minuses and make sure that you guys can make an informed decision. I am not in any way affiliated with Bridge Build. I'm just trying to give you guys information so that if you feel you need a rack that folds, maybe save some space, you can at least say, oh, I want that one, or you can cross this off your list. So along with that, just like I said in the intro, I'm gonna be talking about the pull-up bar that you can buy with it, the upgraded J-cups, if that's worth it or not to you, and then the dip bar that you can buy for it as well as quite a few of the cons that you may come across if you're looking at forums or discussion boards or something like that, and show you some ways that I've gotten around some of those cons. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is just the rack itself. So the beautiful thing about this rack is it has its own foot plate, and that foot plate will fold up, and I'll show you that later. Opposed to some of the other racks that I looked at that could fold up on the wall, whether it was together or up. So the reason I chose this rack over those other options was a few reasons. Number one, I have 8.5-foot ceilings, but I'm also standing on a platform. So I actually lose about 4 to 6 inches. Plus, I have some lower hanging lights so that I can have a lot of brightness in this gym. So again, it cuts it down a little bit where 8 feet was already kind of pushing it. So I actually went with a 7-foot rack. Now, when it comes to some of the other racks that you might be looking at, there's the PRX rack, the one that folds up on your wall. In my space, the only one I was going to be able to use was a 6-foot rack because, again, when it moves up, I couldn't have gotten a 7-foot rack in here because it goes up a significant amount. Now, along with that comes maybe you're looking at a Rogue folding rack, whether it's a 2-post or a 4-post, this being a 2-post, and we'll talk about that in a second. The reason I didn't go with a folding rack was the way that my studs lined up with how my garage is set up and where I wanted the platform. It was going to make the rack a little offset. And with the heater that you can see behind me, for some of my taller clients, especially as they would try to do shoulder presses, they would hit that heater. Or we'd have to go closer to the garage door that you can't see on camera right now. But the problem with that is there's the junction box, which is just off camera, that would get in the way, and the last thing you want is something falling into that junction box. So again, based on my space, I had to put the platform where it is, and therefore I couldn't really use the studs, which is where the Phoenix rack came in really handy for me, is because not only can I fold it up and get it out of my way, because those other racks, even though they fold it up on the wall, because we do weightlifting on the platform beneath me, if I lose something behind, or heaven forbid I fall backward, there's stuff behind you could hit, okay? So it was really important that I got the rack out of the way. Now, with the Phoenix rack, again, it's going to be similar construction to all the other folding racks that you'll see. It's the 11 gauge steel, so it's very sturdy. Over 1,000 pounds can be lifted on this thing. You're going to have no problem with it. Now, this rack being a 2-post rack, you can actually get an upgrade and make it a 4-post rack if you're wanting a power rack. For me, I like to drop my weights to foam pads, so I don't even use the spotter arms that you could buy with this, just because I'm comfortable enough to just drop it. And most of the time with my clients, well, all the time, I'm right there. I can spot them. I can do whatever. And those spotter arms just didn't make sense for our space. But again, those spotter arms I've seen great reviews on as well. But I have considered getting a second set of posts, perhaps moving these taller posts to the front and actually going a little shorter in the back. I haven't quite decided yet. But I do have a light that's just directly overhead. And again, for some of my taller clients, that puts us deeper into the platform. And you're not going to be able to press with 4 posts here because there's typically a cross member that goes between those posts, and I would hit that. And that's just not going to work in my space. So that's why we went with this folding half-ish rack. It's not technically a half rack, but I still call it a half rack. Okay, so again, you can get 4 posts, and with those 4 posts, it can still fold up and move away, which is really cool with the Phoenix Bridge Built rack. Another thing that attracted me to the bridge built one was the color, right? It was cool that there was, I don't even know, 15 different colors I could have chosen. Yes, this cost me a little bit extra and I'm happy with that. But, and I'll talk about this more in the cons section later, the change in color delayed shipping this thing for quite a few months, okay? So other than that, I mean, this rack is solid. It moves really well. The mechanism is simple yet effective, and I'll show you guys how I fold it up in real time, how I open it up in real time in a little bit. So now I want to talk about the pull-up bar above. Now this pull-up bar, I highly recommend if you are going to go with any folding rack, even the ones that fold up on the wall or go up on the wall, please be smart and get a pull-up bar. Now, if you guys are going with a 6-foot rack, this being a 7-foot, but a 6-foot rack, you got to think that, maybe it's up here, you got to think that that pull-up bar is going to come down a little bit. And if you're around that 5'10" tall, you're going to have to most likely duck under that pull-up bar to unrack your bar and then re-duck under. So keep that in mind. The reason I highly recommend the pull-up bar is so that you have side-to-side stability, okay? If I didn't have that pull-up bar, each upright is independent, but the nice thing is because of the base plate down below, which you'll be seeing when I actually pan to the J-cups next, there's still quite a bit of stability, but I prefer to be a little bit more safe, and that's why not only did I go taller than any of my clients, but also go with the pull-up bar. Now, if you're going to buy a bridge-built rack, buy their pull-up bar because it's going to fit the holes perfectly. You're not going to have to modify anything, which I'll show you how I modify some other attachments, because one of the cons, and we'll talk about this more later, is the size of these holes. But again, be smart, get a pull-up bar for any of your folding racks, even if you're not buying this one. If you go with the 4-post, I do recommend the pull-up bar with multiple grips that goes in the middle because it's going to squeak a little bit less. This does have a tendency to squeak right where this pin is, but it being a wider piece of metal, you're going to get a little bit more stability in between everything. Plus, with those crossbars coming this way and the pull-up bar in the middle, you're going to just get a much more solid rack than if you just went with the C4 pull-up bar like I have. Again, if you're buying a Phoenix rack, expect to pay the extra, whatever it is, $150 on this pull-up bar. You're going to really, really want it. Okay, so now I'm going to cut to the J-cups, but I'll also show you the floor. Okay, floor first. So I'll be showing you this mechanism later. If you're going to get this rack, the cool thing is these uprights, you can move them any which way that you want. So if you want it really deep into your rack so you have more space, if you want it further back, there's plenty of holes down here that you can make that adjustment, especially if you're going to go with the 4th post. But again, as you can see, there's this nice U shape to the platform, and it really keeps it stable. You can actually get rubber footing for it as well if you really want it. It raises it up a little bit. If for some reason you're nervous that this is going to slide a little bit. And the rack itself can move a little bit, but it's never something that's been a concern of mine because it can just skate around. Again, I'll show you the mechanism later, but what I want to talk about are these wheels that you can see. If your plan is to fold this rack up and move it more than a few feet, you definitely need to get wheels. Now, some people are going to cheap out and get the smaller wheels. I highly recommend you get these bigger, almost turf type wheels. You're not going to have a squeak because they're a little bit taller, especially in my situation, coming off of a raised platform. It makes it a lot easier to get down and get up, and I'll show you that again later when we're folding this rack. But keep in mind that compared to some of the other folding racks, they may come out from the wall and sit on the ground. But again, you don't have this awesome extra stability, especially if you're the type like I am, you dive bomb it into the rack once in a while. You don't have to worry about the legs coming up at all. Now, granted, some of the racks that are mounted to the wall, they're mounted to the wall, so you don't really have to worry too much about them moving. But keep in mind, if you hit that rack a little weird and it tries to twist over time, maybe it comes out of the stringer, maybe it comes out of the stud. I'm not saying it will, I'm just saying it's something to think about. I don't have to worry about ripping holes into my wall with this thing. Okay, let's talk about these J-cups. So I went with the more expensive J-cup, and by more expensive, it's almost double the price that you would actually pay for the rack. So the rack typically in all black is like $800, and it comes with the $225 J-cup. This is an additional $150, $175. But The reason I would recommend it, if you are a power lifter of any sort, you're doing bench press, if sometimes you have a tendency to rack a bar a little funky out of your squat, or if you have multiple people using it, whether it's you, your wife, your friends, your kids, or whatever, I do recommend you go with the BFJ or at least some form of a roller cup. Now, there's quite a few companies out there that make J cups. You don't have to spend $400 on it, but keep in mind, when you buy the rack, you really don't get the option to opt out of the $225 J cups that they come with it. So you're kind of stuck spending the money. And unfortunately, you either get the roller cups or you don't. I went with the roller cups. Now, the reason I like these is, again, roller cups. So when the bar is on here, it can move side to side, which is really cool because if you're trying to line up for a squat, sometimes you got to maneuver it a little bit. Maybe if you're laying down for bench, you maneuver it a little bit. Okay, it's perfectly centered, and then you can roll it off. And then what's also nice is you go from this roller to the ledge. So you can pull the bar off onto this ledge, and then when you're ready, you can lift it off and you can squat or bench or whatever you're doing. A nice cool thing too is this lip here is tall enough the bar isn't going anywhere when you're pulling on it or whatever. But it's small enough that as you come back, you can hit this upright as you can see, and it can come down. Now this is use after a year, a full year, and 30 hours a week. I have no idea how often we're actually using it, but there's hundreds of hours on this and it's barely showing anywhere. This is, 15 years before I'd ever have to even think about replacing this for how much we use it. If it's just you and maybe another person using it, you probably never have to replace it. But it's heavy duty. This thing weighs, 7-8 pounds. I mean, this thing's quite heavy. And with the protective plastic all the way around, you don't have to worry about it scratching up your rack. And even if you get a different rack, you can actually get a different pin back here so that it could fit any rack that you want. But if you're getting a different rack, you don't have to spend the $400 on this. Is it cool? Yeah. Is it worth the $400? No. In my mind, though, it was, I'm spending $225 on J cups anyways, and I do want roller cups. So rather than paying $175 for a nice set of ghost roller cups or rogue roller cups, whatever, shoot, I'm just going to have to spend the extra $175, and that's what I went with. Now, I actually went with black on black with the J cups, but what I did was these plates come off really easily, and then I just painted a copper square. I found a paint that matches pretty well. Only in the right light can you tell it's just a little bit different because, we got a powder coat versus paint that came in a can. But again, I personally did this and it saved me like $75. I also didn't like, my option was paint this plate copper, which didn't quite work with what I was trying to do in this room. Or you could paint behind the plate copper and then this lip would have been copper. And again, it's not something that I wanted. And again, for the $75 or whatever they were going to charge me to do that, I said, I'll go buy a $10 can of paint and some tape. Okay, so the J cups. The cool thing about this too is not a lot of J cups have this. When you're benching, and this happens with some of my newer clients, when they're doing that last rep, instead of finishing their rep, then racking the bar, they fall into a tendency of getting nervous, and rightfully so. As they're pressing, they'll push back towards the rack quite a bit and hit underneath this J cup. But the beautiful thing about this, a huge plus, is they have this protective plastic all the way around. They've even cut out little grooves in here for the roller cup that you can see so that this metal has never touched one of my barbells. There's not a scratch on it. Oh, there is a scratch. So maybe I did screw something up at one point, but it doesn't typically touch my bar. It's probably a client went in a little crooked, hit it at an angle. It wasn't a normal thing. But again, it's set up so that it protects your bar, which is great. Now, let's talk about the dip bar. Okay, so I'm a little out of shot here, but the dip bar, $250 for this dip bar. Because I have clients here and I don't like things wiggling too much, I needed to buy the Bridge-Built dip bar with the 3/4 inch pin so that it fit the holes perfectly. So this is kind of diving into the con section a little bit, which we'll get into right after this anyway. So it forced me to pay $250 for a dip bar that isn't adjustable. It does have a little bit of a curve to the horns a little bit, so it's not straight. So based on how deep you go into this bar, you can get different widths. And of course, we wouldn't dip with the J cup in the way. But when you're doing the dips, you are right here in front of this post. So one thing I wish they would have done, but I understand leverages, I understand this could have caused some stress to the metal, is if they had made this just a little bit longer so that as you're going down, you don't have to worry about this so much. But that's kind of beside the point. I mean, this thing is beefy, this thing is heavy. $250 is well spent. You're getting plenty of steel for that cost, plus the powder coating. But again, I did it because of the 3/4 inch pin. And the cool thing is how easy it actually does go in. So I just slip it in. Well, most of the time I just slip it in. Maybe I need my wife to help me find the hole. I slip it in and then I can just pivot it. It goes in and it's in tight. Now, I will say some companies do make special pins that you can get. So American Barbell stands out to me, even Bridgebuilt. You can buy certain equipment like the J cups. Instead of a 3/4 inch pin, you can ask for a 1 inch pin, a 5/8 pin, whatever. I'm not quite sure on dip bars, but I'm assuming there's some companies that will give you a 3/4 inch pin. But again, if this were just my own home gym, the modification I'll show you later that I did, one of the cons of this 3/4 inch system, one of the modifications I did, I would probably do that on maybe like a Rogue Matador or something like that, one that's adjustable. Because if it's just me, I'm willing to take the risk for myself. I'm not saying you have to, nor am I saying you should. But again, I bought this because my clients, I'm very particular. I don't ever want to put them at risk. So again, sometimes modifying the pin, to me, it's one of those gray areas liability wise, right? But again, if it's for you, for your own home gym, $250 for a dip bar, although it's great, it's beautiful, it's heavy duty, it's solid, it's worth $250. There are plenty of dip bars that are just as solid for much less price, right? And if you don't even need a dip bar, you're wasting your time in this section anyway, right? Okay, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna talk about the cons. And we'll actually start with the dip bar. So one of the biggest cons of the Bridge-Built rack compared to the PRX rack and the Rogue racks that fold up on the wall is storage. So again, I'll show you guys how to fold this rack up, move this rack, unfold this rack. But a big problem is, so here we have this dip bar, which to Bridge-Built's credit, they set it up so you could put it on the Phoenix rack. But they typically recommend that you get their dip bar for their big rigs, their 6-post or 12-post rigs. And then you just have a dedicated spot that you put the dip bar, and then you don't have to worry about storing it. But again, in my home gym, I need to be able to take this dip bar off and put it somewhere not up against the wall where it's just gonna fall and scrape. I've got 2 young kids around. One's a 2.5-year-old, and she climbs on everything in here. So everything has to be bolted down off of the floor. She can't trip on it that way or knock it down. So I had to come up with some storage solutions. Now, the same storage solution I use for the dip bar, I've modified to use for the J cups. I've also modified it somewhat for the pull-up bar. So, one fix kind of fix it all. But something to Bridge-Built, if they're actually watching this video, something they could do is when I show you what I've done, just simply because I use more of a curved hook, which I'll show you in a second. If they made a sheet metal, beautiful Bridge-Built black with the nice cutouts to simulate the 2x4s I have on the wall, and then with the hooks, if they made one that was a little bit flatter, more for like a ladder, I would say, rather than like a hose hook that I'm using, and it'll make sense here in a second, I would have paid $50 to store the dip bar. I would have paid another $50 to store the J cups, another $50 to store the pull-up bar because it would have been Bridge-Built black. It would have matched. It would have looked really nice. So let's jump there and then I'll show you kind of how I'm doing this. Okay, so if we zoom in, so this is the 2x4 that I'm going to use to store this dip belt, or this dip bar rather. Literally, it's a 2x4. It's like 20 inches long. A few bolts that are into the studs, right? So this thing is solid. And then I literally went to Home Depot for $8 a piece and bought these hose hooks. Now again, if they made a bent sheet metal that looked like a 2x4, but it was hollow, you could bolt it to the wall, and they had some nice hooks that were super solid. Again, I would pay out the nose to have that rather than just a hunk of wood on the wall, okay? But here's how I'll do it. So I'm just gonna go off camera and get the dip bar. That's what you're hearing right now. Okay, So in order to store, again, a big problem is storage. You either put all this stuff on the floor, or you figure it out, right? And I'm not a put it on the floor type guy. So by putting the dip bar toward me, I can literally just set it in and lean it against the wall. Now, I can lean it against the wall because I have wood on the wall. But what Bridgebuilt could do is they could figure out how to tip the hooks so that it would actually just lay like this. It wouldn't actually be up against the wall, it'd be more flat. And again, it being more of a two round of a hook, it has a tendency to fall back. They could easily put like a bent 90-degree angle to prevent it from rolling back and get stuck so that it's not touching your wall. But again, really simple solution. Now, just above me here, as you can see, I have this same setup, exact same distance, same everything. It's not perfect, but this is how I store my J-cups. So I can just take a J-cup and slip it in. Now again, these are curved, right? If they were a little flatter, they would hold the J-cup a lot better. But again, it was the same setup and I kind of made this work. I kind of made this work just so that it was one solution, right? So now J-cups are on the wall, dip bars on the wall. We're getting through the process of me taking it apart, and I'm actually going to fold it up here in a second. And then the pull-up bars next. Just above me, you can see these hooks here. Right now, granted, I was dumb. I need to put a piece of 2x4 behind this because when I put the pull-up bar on the wall, it does scratch my new paint. So I'll end up just cutting some wood stringers and going vertical, so it pulls it away. But you get the idea. So if I pull the pull-up bar out, it'll just go right on this wall. Try not to scratch my paint because, again, I still haven't gotten the 2x4s behind it. But without scratching my paint. Okay. But, again, it stores on the wall really nicely. And I like to think it looks really good. And I'm actually going to back the camera up so you can kind of see what it looks like when it's on the wall. Then I'll actually show you how I've modified a 5/8 pin with a different company's product so I could use it on the rack. Because another con that they have is they don't have a ton of equipment. There's no, chest supported pads. They do have a pulley system, but if you're getting the 6-foot rack or even the 7-foot rack, you may not want to consider the Omni pulley system. And the reason being is the range of motion isn't going to be that large. On the 8-foot racks, definitely you could get the quick release pulley system. You're going to get full ranges of motion. You could do pull downs, all kinds of stuff. But since I don't own it, I'm not really going to review it. But again, for a 6-foot or a 7-foot rack, that may not be an option for you. But let's see what this looks like on the wall. So just like that, right? We have our J-cups on the wall, pull-up bars on the wall, dip bars on the wall. And again, Bridgebuilt, all you have to do is bend some sheet metal to make it look like a hollowed out 2x4. You have places for you to bolt to the wall, right? 16-inch on center. And then you have a dip bar specific hook and a, BFJ specific hooks. I would assume that the regular J-cups would fit a similar setup just because it's flat in here as well. And I assume it's pretty much the same. And then for the pull-up bar, instead of having a huge stringer across the wall, which would be kind of crazy, you may want to go separate like this, but look how nice this looks. And it wouldn't cost a whole lot, and a lot of people, I think, would go for it. Okay, so now let's talk about how I modified the chest-supported pad from Bells of Steel in order to match, or in order to work with this rack. Okay, so funny enough, I use the same storage solution for the dip bar, the J-cups, and this pad. It's pretty funny. Anyway, I have this pad upside down in order to store it, but this is a chest-supported pad, right? It goes into your rack, you can adjust it, you can lay on it flat. So a big problem is so many home gym equipment companies, they make their stuff in 5/8 or 1-inch holes, right? And this is a 3/4 inch. So here's what I did. I took my 5/8 pin and I got a crankshaft modifier and turned my 5/8 pin into a 3/4 inch pin. Now, I believe this is a 3-inch. I could have certainly gone 4-inch. I wasn't thinking. Honestly, I should have measured it. But I will put a link in the description below. I got it off Amazon. It was like $8. So again, if you're just working out by yourself, maybe it's you and your partner, and you're like, I kind of like the fact that I can move this rack, but they don't really have a lot of stuff. If you're comfortable modifying it, because all I did was bent a piece of metal, okay? I mean, it came as a tube, and you'll see the image, just goes over, and I just squeeze the shit out of it. So it doesn't go anywhere. It slips in just fine. It's just as stable. It's no problem. I mean, technically, when I put this pin in, because it goes into the rack, and then there's an additional pin that goes in right here, very similar to all the other stuff. There is a little play in here, but again, because this pin is 3/4 inch, I'm not worried at all. It's very stable. The main part that is attached to the rack for support is the correct thickness. It doesn't bother me at all. And again, this little pin that there's, what is that? 1/8 of an inch wobble. Who gives a? But again, I highly recommend, instead of buying 5/8 and just letting it be loose in there, you definitely want to modify the main pin so that it's in there nice and solid. And this rack can be a great investment for you. So now let's check out how to fold this thing up and move it. All right, so we've already taken the pull-up bar off. We've already taken the dip bar off. We've already taken the J-cups. So you won't get a sense of how long it would take to take that stuff off. But when I put it all back together, I will film myself putting it all back together, just like I had it at the start of this video. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna slide this away from the wall, and you're gonna see it's only held together by 4 large hitch pins, which again, this thing is totally stable. I'm not nervous about it at all. The reason I say it like that is it's really quick. It's really easy. It's really simple. Sometimes I have an issue finding the hole, but what guy doesn't? And it takes me a second here or there extra. But again, once I figured out that I had everything too tight when I first put it together, I mean, I had every bolt super tight. It was a pain to get apart and together. Then I realized, hey, you dummy, you're making it, there's so much friction on those pivot joints, they just can't work very well. But I've pretty much got it dialed in now. So what I'll do is I'm just gonna slide it away from the wall just a little bit so that I don't wrap my knuckles, because the wall's right there. And this is a really important reason that I don't have those boots that I talked about underneath, is so I can slide it and get it apart. If you have those boots, I mean, you're fighting that rubber contact, right? So I'm just gonna pull it away. Okay, so I'm gonna pull the pins so that you see, it's really simple. But then what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna put the pins back in, and I will pan out with the camera so you can see me completely dismantle this thing, fold it up, move it, put it back, put it all together. So again, these pins, there's just 4 of them. They just pull right out. Now, when you have all the 4 pins out and it's all folded up, you'll only see it briefly. What I do is I just put the pins back into the machine or into the rack so that they don't go anywhere, so I don't have to worry about storing them. But I'll put the pins back in, and then I'll pan out and show you how to move this thing. Okay, so to fold this thing up, little acrobats at first, it's not gonna tip. I just don't like, if I were to just grab it from one side, the uprights kind of tip in on themselves. I don't like that. So what I'll do is I'm actually going to just put my leg on one side to prevent this thing from falling in too much. Then I'm just going to grab this inner lever here. And because it's loose enough, as soon as I pull up on it, this rack's going to pretty much fold together. So I'm going to grab onto this upright, grab this and pull. And then you can see, it's already moved quite a bit. Now I have found if I pull one side all the way in too far, the handle in here gets a little bent, and then it can get kind of tough to actually put the pins back together. But if right here, if I kind of feather it in a little bit and then get to the other side, when I slide it together, it just lines up really nicely. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is actually unfold this, and then I'm gonna go nonstop so you can see how long it would take me to actually put this together. Okay, full speed, let's fold this thing up. Pull. Make sure this thing stays nice and flat. Just like that, they line up. Put one of the pins in the holes down here, and they line up really well. It's a little tight right now, but yeah, I'll move that a touch. There you go. All right. Having troubles finding the hole, I see. And then I just put these pins into these holes that are just kind of out of the way. Because again, I don't want to have to find a storage solution for just some stupid pins, right? Where's the hole? Is that gonna go in? All right, so then I have a ramp, which I don't know if you can see, just that you can see it. So because I have a raised platform, I'm just gonna tip this back, preventing the uprights from clicking because they can have a tendency to kind of slam into each other. Then, without hitting the light above me, these wheels are so nice, I can just wheel it off of my platform and then we're underway. So let's see how long it takes me to put it back together. So I'll back it up, go up the platform. Now, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna utilize these wheels to help me unfold this thing. So I'm gonna actually set it on this side now, pull my pins. Always holding on for safety. So I'm gonna pull, and most people are just gonna grab, pull, and just kind of pull it out. I just stick one of my fingers in the hole. It doesn't seem to bother me at all. So as I pull, the wheels are gonna help me do this. I'm gonna get to somewhere in here maybe, and then I'm just gonna step on it and make sure it's nice and flat. Then once the uprights are in the right angle, I can just put the pins back. Four pins hold it all together. And again, these things are beefy, which is nice. And then I like my rack over here. So I just slide it where I want it. And then from there, pull-up bar first. Cool thing about the pull-up bar is I look to my right first, get that pin going. Then I put it in and it just folds down. Pin goes in. Again, that's why I also recommend the C4 Pullup Bar. Is the nice thing about it is it was designed to fit all of the holes of this rack. So that it just goes together really well. So again, I'll even put the dip bar in, which I wouldn't normally do. I wouldn't normally put the dip bar in because of course I'd keep it on the wall, but just trying to show you how quick this stuff goes. Slips into the hole, down, and pin. So there you go. I dismantled it, moved it back, opened it up. What'd that take me? 90 seconds, 2 minutes, whatever. Chances are you're not gonna have to move your rack all the time, but if you do, it's not that big of a pain. There is one drawback, and I should have stopped and showed you. When it's folded up and you have it sitting, it is pretty stable, but the base isn't very wide. So where you store it, you may want to consider putting some type of a bungee strap around it if you're going to put it up against the wall or in a corner. I would never leave my rack folded up in the middle of my garage with my daughter running around. I may move it and then just tell my wife, hey, don't let her out here while I'm lifting. The rack is just kind of in the middle. But if I were to store it for a longer time, or maybe if we have like a birthday party in the garage, what I would do is I'd tuck it into a corner and then maybe, I have a snowblower over there. I'd put something in front of it. So none of the kids around can like pull on it and it falls on them. I don't want to deal with any of that. So it is another drawback is there isn't really a way of, once it's stored, dealing with it. But again, a bungee cord with an eye hook, you just wrap it. It's not going anywhere, similar to how I store other things. But again, not very hard to put together, not very hard to open up, not very hard to move, especially with those really nice rollers. And again, if you are gonna do a platform, I highly recommend you get a little bit of a ramp, and I'll have a link to the ramp that I use in the description below. Keep in mind, again, it's a 3-inch ramp, whatever it is. And what I actually ended up doing is, in order to attach it to my platform, I put a seamless hinge and bolted that to the platform and then folded the hinge and bolted that to the ramp itself so that the ramp doesn't go anywhere. The problem with some ramps is you can't really quite get it bolted to your rack or to your platform rather. And when you're trying to move your rack, if it's not bolted, it's gonna slide. So again, always be safe. If you need more advice on how to do that, please just write it down in the description below and I'll be more thorough on how I actually put a ramp on the platform. Okay, now we got it all folded, it's all back. The final con I want to talk about is if you order this rack in any other color than black. So I can't speak to buying in black because it's their standard color. They say they can ship it out faster. I ran into the problem, and in part it's somewhat my problem or my fault. I ordered the copper rack. Now, when I reached out to the company, I said, hey, I'd like to buy a copper rack, but on your website it says, 20-day turnaround, whatever it did. And hey, I just wanted to know, when are you painting copper racks so that I don't have to wait so long and I can get it? And they basically gave me a salesman answer, and that's pretty much all I can say. It was probably true, but I definitely felt like I was being sold so that I buy the rack now and, we'll deal with you being pissed off later. Because what they said was, hey, at the end of next week, we're already painting racks. So you definitely want to buy this rack now so that you can get it in no time. So I thought, all right, I'm going to buy this rack. Now, when I bought the rack, all I did was I bought it with standard J cups, the copper rack, which cost me more for the copper, and the pull-up bar. Because I thought to myself, okay, I'll maybe upgrade the J cups later. I hadn't quite decided. I'm a bit of a gearhead, so that kind of worked against me. And then the dip bar, I'll just buy it at a later time because, it's whatever it was, $1,200, $1,400. And I'm like, if it takes a few weeks, I don't want them to just have my money tied up. Now, that being said, I waited until, the 2 weeks, everything got painted, at least in my mind, everything got painted. I reached out and said, hey, I would actually like to upgrade my J cups and I would like to add the dip bar to my total. Is that possible? They said, absolutely. So I did that. Okay, cool. Then every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, they weren't responding to me or they weren't reaching out to me. I had to reach out to them and said, where's my rack? I thought, you painted it. It was, lined up all this. Oh, it's going to be a little bit, it's going to be 2 more weeks. Okay. I'd wait 3 weeks. It's going to be 2 weeks. I wait 3 weeks. It's going to be 2 weeks. I wait 3 weeks. From them saying they were going to have it painted and shipped, they didn't say shipped. To have it painted within that week, I thought, okay, they paint it, give it a week or two, they'll have it boxed up and ship it to me. It was nearly 4 months before I got my rack. Now, imagine, with my clients, I was pretty upset. I was excited about this rack coming. And, every 2 weeks, I was basically telling them, it's postponed, it's postponed, it's postponed, it's postponed. And this was during a time we didn't have a squat rack. We were using jerk blocks instead. We didn't have a bench press situation. So my clients were gracious enough to just kind of deal with that fact. But it was 4 months. Now, there was some miscommunication or misunderstanding on their part. When I said I wanted to upgrade my J cups, I said I wanted it black on black because I knew if I let them put copper on it, it could have extended it out even more months. But even despite saying that, and that being what's shown on my invoice, they still gave me the excuse of, oh, the reason we haven't shipped it yet is because we still need to paint your J cups copper. Reached out and said, no, it needs to be black. I just want black. Just send me black. The rack should already be done. It was pretty apparent at that point that the rack hadn't been painted yet. They were just trying to stall me. Something must have happened. I don't know. I really don't care. And that was just their way, again, of selling me, of just trying to keep me on the bandwagon, of trying to make sure that I'm not asking for a refund, because at a later date, I looked on forums and a lot of other people were having 3 to 4 month delay times. Now, it's been over a year since that happened. That could be different. I looked on the website before shooting this video. It doesn't look like it's different. I'm just letting you know. If you buy this rack, you have to understand it's going to take time. Now, being a year removed, am I over it? Not really. It still stinks because, again, I felt like I got sold. Would I still buy stuff from Bridgebuilt? Yes. Does it hurt their quality product? No. Is their customer service bad? Not necessarily. Did they sell me? Yes. But again, this rack is great. Do I regret it? No, it's the only rack that would work in my space because I needed to fold it up and move it. So I was kind of stuck with it either way, which is why I never asked for a refund, because of some of the things we talked about. The folding rack wouldn't work on my wall. So again, just keep in mind, this could have just been because I went with the Bridgebuilt copper. If you go all black, they say that it's a much faster turnaround time because that's more of their common color. But again, just, buyer beware, it's going to take months. But it came packaged so well, not a scratch on it. Everything was so over like bubble wrapped and in boxes. And I mean, it took me an hour just to get the stuff out of the box, and putting it together was actually really quick. It was no problem, just a few bolts. It was actually really easy. I did end up having to buy, the bigger wrenches, the bigger socket wrenches, just because I wasn't going to screw around with the crescent wrench. So you may want to consider doing that as well. So was it worth it? Yes. Please be patient if you're going to buy this rack. And again, that's not to diss Bridgebuilt. It could have just been my situation. I'm just trying to give you all of the information I possibly have so you guys can make an informed decision. My experience should in no way prevent you from getting this rack. Again, looking back, is it worth it? Absolutely. It's well built. There are some flaws. There are some cons, especially with 3/4 inch pins not working. I don't need a bunch of stuff. We have, all kinds of other equipment in this gym, and I don't need it all to attach to my rack. If you're the type that you need it to attach to your rack, keep in mind that there was a limited edition sale with the Phoenix rack. I believe it was all black. I'm not quite sure. They did do 1-inch holes. So I would recommend, if you're considering this rack, but it's the 3/4 inch pin that's holding you back, reach out and see if, number one, they would be willing to do another special edition run for you, or maybe it costs a little bit more money. They must have the tooling to be able to do 1-inch racks. Maybe you can reach out and say, hey, what would it cost for me to get a 1-inch rack? And if they come back and say, oh, it's this much, and you agree to it, great. Or they could say at that point, hey, in Black Friday or Christmas or January, we're going to be running another 1-inch special. If you want to buy it at that time, that's the time to get it. So just keep that in mind. There might be a little wiggle room with the whole 1-inch thing. I didn't know about the 1-inch hole until like 6 months after I bought the rack, because they ran this special edition. So it's just, again, trying to give you as much information as I possibly have so you can make an informed decision. So there you go, the Bridgebuilt Phoenix rack. I showed you how it operates, how you can fold it, how you can move it, how you can put it back together. I showed you some of the pitfalls, but also how to work around some of those pitfalls, whether it's the storage solution or the 3/4 inch holes for the pins. I showed you how to modify those. We talked about the pull-up bar. We talked about the J-cups, whether that was worth it or not to you, and the dip bar. So if you guys like content like this, if you like me reviewing and giving my honest opinion on my equipment, please leave a like and a comment down in the description below. Subscribe to this channel. I do not only reviews of weightlifting shoes, of equipment, but also I try to teach you guys not only how to maybe lose weight and everything technique involved in the gym, from body weight exercises to barbell exercises. This is Coach Josh with GarageGangGyms.com. I'll see you next time.